Okay, welcome to the first lesson of our Adobe After Effects series of tutorials. This lesson here will start you with an overview of the program and some basic functions that are very similar to Premiere, like doing imports and other things of that nature. So go to your Start button, go to All Programs, and scroll down and look for the folder called Adobe Production Premium CS6. Open CS6. You'll find Adobe After Effects. Click on that. It does take a few minutes or a minute sometimes to open After Effects, so be patient. It takes a lot of RAM to run this program along with computer power. The processor has to be real fast for this program. So the first window that pops up is this opening window, which comes to the front of the screen. You've got options to click on projects you've recently worked on or open a project. We're going to skip this for now and hit close. So here is what After Effects looks like. Kind of similar to Premiere, but things have moved around some. For example, your Tools panel is on the top of the window. You've got your project panel here, just like in Premiere. You've got your main window to view the composition, or the monitor is here. There are some panels we'll get to in the future on the side that deal with text and playing and previewing your work. And at the bottom, what was a timeline is now called a composition. It's a little bit different than Premiere because you're not just laying videos and text items in to be shown on your video screen. You are oftentimes going to be blending them with things or creating lots of keyframes to create animations. All right, so this is what the program looks like. Now, of course, if you want to import, which we'll start by doing that, you're going to do one of three things. File, import. You can also hit Control I. You can also right-click, import, or simply double-click. Navigate to the folder that I provided to you with the files for doing these tutorials. It's called Basic Training Footage. Go ahead and click on that, and you'll see there is a bunch of files that are in there, movie clips and an image. Now, just like in Premiere, you can click on one file and open it, or you can hold down Shift after clicking on the first file, and then click on the last file to select all of them, or a range of them. You can also use Control to click on certain files if you want to just bring certain files in. We're going to bring all of them in, so I'm going to select them all using the mouse lasso method, and I'm going to hit Open. So all the files are now imported into the project panel. So organization is key in this program. Some projects you'll work on will have many assets. Assets are the things you work with, from movies to titles to pictures and so on. We're going to make a folder. So, like in Premiere, you could do new folder. They do call it a folder in this program, where Premiere called it a bin. You could also just hit the folder button. So now it creates a folder, and we're going to title that folder Footage, because we're going to put the video footage in this folder. Now that's pretty easy to do by selecting all of the movies and dropping them in the footage folder. I'm also going to create another folder and call this Images, and then take my image, cloud, and put that in its own folder. So now you've been organizing your work. You're pretty much ready to start. So for the footage that we're going to use throughout the tutorials, they're not all high def. Some of them are lower def. So we will set up our compositions based on our needs. For example, in After Effects, if you're making a commercial, let's say, a lot of commercials come in at 30 seconds in length. So the timeline right now has no time on it at all. The timeline is not active until you create the settings for the timeline. To do this, you go to Composition, because remember, the timeline is now a composition, and you click and go to New Composition, which is also Control N. When you open up the dialog box for New Composition, we have some things that we can check into, like naming the composition, setting up what the settings will be for the video quality, and the time. So right now it's called Comp 1. I'm going to call this Lesson 1. And then I'd like you to do the same thing. Now the preset is pretty important because it needs to be the size of the video you want to output. If I was outputting a high def video, I would choose one of the 1080 with 30 frames. This one actually is the one we usually use. But for the footage we're using, which is not high def, we're going to stick with NTSC DV, which is standard def footage. We're also going to change the time down at the bottom here. Whatever your time says, we're going to work with our preset comp. 30 seconds is normal. Sometimes it's 10 seconds, but you actually dictate its time by the length of what you're trying to create. So it runs the same as Premiere. These two digits are frames. These are seconds, minutes, and hours. So let's change this to a 20-second comp. 20 seconds and 0 frames. We'll leave the background white and say OK. All right, when the program is opened, one thing you'll notice is now I have a timeline that is 20 seconds long. The panel has become active because we're in a composition right here called Lesson 1. Remember, you can, just like in Premiere, actually make more than one composition, which will come in handy in the future. It creates a composition icon, which is like the sequence icon in Premiere. So that way we can click on a composition from the project panel and go to it directly. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to take one of your footage videos called Girl, and we're going to drop it in the composition. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can drop it right on the monitor window, or you can drop it right into the composition panel. And there it is. Now the video is a little bit larger than this setting, so it's actually, I think, a 720 resolution video, but we're going to work in the smaller space because that would be with the output that we might want to make for the size, maybe for a video frame in a web page or something like that. A couple things to consider here is that the composition itself moved in to the timeline, and there are a lot of features that we'll look at that were not available in Premiere that you'll only find here in After Effects. The video clip itself comes in as this bar, and you'll notice it's only about 3.5 seconds long, even though we have a 20-second composition. We could be putting other items in our composition and placing them in spots down this timeline so that we fit the full 20 seconds. All right, so a couple things to consider. One is how to play back a clip. Now when you put it in Premiere, you might remember that you could hit spacebar and the clip will play. You'll notice this green bar is appearing. That means it's rendering the actual footage. So when I play it a second time, it'll play in real time. The first time it renders, so it might run slower. You'll have to get used to that. Another way of playing clips isn't just the spacebar. Spacebar plays video only. If there was audio on this clip, you'd see a little audio speaker icon right here, and the spacebar alone would not play the audio. You'd have to hit the 0 key on your keypad on the right side of your keyboard, and that would play audio back along with the video. So that's a little bit different from Premiere 2. Audio is played specifically by hitting the 0 in the number keypad. Another thing to notice, that's an early thing to learn, is another way to play your Premiere, your After Effects videos. There's a preview panel. Now if you don't see it here, you can always go to Window and find the name of the window that you're trying to open. And we were looking for Preview, which is open. So there's Preview. Preview has most of your play controls. Notice they're not at the bottom of the composition viewing window. So some of them are pretty common from Premiere. Go to beginning of clip or end of clip, play, back 1 frame, forward 1 frame, and then RAM preview. RAM preview is the one you want to use oftentimes in order to get the green bar to render and also play audio at the same time. There are some other features in this, but we're going to leave it alone because we don't change these very often, like frame rates, resolution. We don't deal with much else. So you could use this panel to see your footage, or you could skip it and use either your spacebar or your 0 control to get audio as well. All right, now the work area bar. Like in Premiere, there's this bar that appears over the top of your footage. If the bar is not over everything, only what is under the bar will get exported. so this part of the video would never be noticed. Comes in handy sometimes. Due to the fact that our footage is actually a lot shorter than the composition I made, you can actually trim your composition to the size of your footage. So let's say we were not going to add other video clips in length in this video. I can adjust right now the actual time of the composition, especially if I didn't know what it was going to be, by simply putting the work area bar over the top of the actual video file. Make sure that you're actually lined up and not cutting some off. Because of the zoom in feature with frames, you want to check this out closer. There are two ways that you can zoom in After Effects. One is to grab the end of this bar up here and it zooms you in or out. So I zoom in and I can see that this gray bar doesn't quite cover all my footage, so my work area needs to be adjusted. There. So now everything is in. Down at the bottom there's also a slider that you can use for zooming, and it zooms in and out, but instead of from the front of the video, it'll zoom in or out from where the current time indicator sits, so that it centers that. Sometimes this zoom is more handy. So that's how you zoom. This program requires lots and lots of RAM. Your machines all have 16 gigabytes in our classroom. Mine has 32. When you render a clip and it turns green, it builds a temporary video in RAM so that it can be seen. The longer that your projects are, then the more RAM that will get eaten up in rendering your footage. So it's good to have a lot of RAM when working with this program so that what you watch can be stored in RAM to be viewed. If your RAM is too small, then what you might play may only render for part, play, and then try to render the next part and play. So RAM is pretty important. Also a fast processor to handle putting together all the various effects and things that will do keyframing, for example, to your clip. Okay, now a couple things to also get into that are pretty important. On this window, there's a bunch of buttons in the bottom of the viewing window, the composition viewer. Some of them are pretty important to know about now. For example, the percentage. You can zoom in your actual window, but you can also have it fit the actual screen so you can see what it will look like. But now I can't see the edge of the actual video clip on the outside, so sometimes this is not desirable. Another way to change this, is a fun way, is if you hold down spacebar, your mouse will turn to a hand, and you can then use the wheel of your mouse to zoom in, and you can use the hand to position where you're seeing. So if you want to zoom in on something and then move it to work on it, holding spacebar down will quickly turn your mouse into a hand, which is used a lot in this program. Okay, next thing, panels. Some people don't like their panels exactly the way they are. Maybe you're working on something and you want more space to see it, so you can adjust the panels by simply going with your mouse between any panel's separation and adjusting that panel. Panels can also be moved by grabbing the box at the top and putting it somewhere else. Okay, so what else do we have? The tilde key. So let's say I'm working in this panel and I want to see even more. The tilde key is a key right next to the one key at the top of your keyboard, right above the tab. It looks like a short squiggly line. If I press the tilde key, that panel that I was working on or had selected will become the main panel. Now I can actually see more and be able to get the detail. If I hit the tilde key again, that panel then goes back into place. Sometimes I want to work in the timeline and do lots of intricate editing, as you'll see later. Hitting the tilde key while this panel is selected will bring up just this panel. Then I can hit it again and go back to seeing everything. Alright, so far you haven't done much to show me for an output except for created your folders and created your composition itself with a file in it, and it's trimmed. That part I'm going to assess at the end of lesson 1, so make sure you save this. A few more things to see that are good to know about is going to come up in the next lessons. So we will stop this lesson here now that you know the basic layout and how to import these basic adjustments inside of Adobe After Effects. Now go on to lesson 2. Don't forget to save your work.